All right, folks, this is part 2 of the Billy Joel saga. Thank you for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. And please drop a like and a comment when you're done. And without further ado, here it is. So moving forward, Billy began to play with a bunch of bands around the New York area, and he gained a lot of experience with performing in a bunch of different genres. This was around the time he was starting to make his bones, make a name for himself. So while Billy was in high school, he connected with this record producer by the name of Shadow Morton. Cool name, I gotta admit. And he was affiliated with a record label named Kama Sutra Records. Kama Sutra Records. So it was here that Billy played in the demo versions of his hit group, the Shangri-Las, in their song Leader of the Pack. Leader of the Pack. That's pretty dope if you ask me. You have this young high school kid coming into a professional studio, playing in a professional song, asking all these questions, meeting these engineers, asking how the business works, and how songwriting works, and how this works and that works. He must have been a kid in a candy store. And that experience is invaluable, especially for a young songwriter. So I like to allude to sports from time to time. So in sports, the more you play with other people, the better you get, especially when you play against people who are better than you. Pretty soon you're going to elevate to their level, and then you're going to surpass them. Then you go on to bigger and better things. Oh, and this is where I was trying to get at. Billy was playing with so many people and so many bands that he was really getting good in his chops. It got to a point where Billy was playing for a ton of local New York bands. It's hard work through repetition, and Billy was going through his reps. So I'm just going to name off a few bands that he was in. So you have the Echoes, who changed their name to the Emeralds, who later changed their name to the Lost Souls. Then he joined a band named the Hassles, and according to what I saw and what I read, the Hassles were just a glorified cover band. Okay, and check this. In 1969, he formed a heavy metal group called Attila. I couldn't find a lot of information about Attila, but they did have album cover artwork and a few songs out there. So interestingly enough, Attila's album artwork looks like a primitive version of an Iron Maiden album without Eddie the Head. Actually, looking at the artwork a bit more, it looks a little bit more like early Black Sabbath. What do you think? And the mere fact that Billy Joel was in a heavy metal band in the 60s? That's freaking awesome. Especially that was like the time heavy metal was born with Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin. Like he knew where it was at. Mind you, this was 2 years after he got out of high school, so he was really young still. And notice how I said got out of high school. He actually didn't end up graduating. He graduated in 1992. He finally achieved that milestone 20-something odd years after the fact. Well, I can tell you this much. In the 60s, he didn't care much for high school or graduating. He was concentrating on his music, and he was making ends meet by playing piano in a piano bar, something that he actually did again in the future. But we'll get to that soon. Back then, Billy was under the mindset that he didn't have time for education. Graduation? Psh, who needed that? He needed to get to work with his music thing. And it was right then and there that he made a prophecy. During a later interview, Billy mentioned his mindset at the time. He said that he was thinking this: I'm not gonna go to Columbia University. I'm gonna go to Columbia Records. Billy did a Babe Ruth and called his shot. Okay, so when we're young, we really don't make the best decisions. We're so starved for attention that we'll sign anything for affirmation, especially if it verifies our talents. Oh, I've seen it happen before. Young musicians will sign with anybody They'll sign with anybody for a contract. You know, it happened with me. I was in a few bands before. Yeah, I was gung-ho about my music. I had that attitude with me and my band. I was all like, yeah, man, my music's gonna change the world, man. We're gonna be the next Led Zeppelin. We're gonna be the next Guns N' Roses, man. And if you don't believe in me, the only problem, nobody ever heard of us. But I could tell you this, after a show, if anyone with a cheap suit were to come up with us with contract in hand, we would have signed it in an instant without even reading it. And we would have not even known what we signed. There could have been a clause to give our left kidney, which I probably would have done at the time. It was around college. Can you blame me? So I could think of dozens of famous and unfamous bands that signed contracts that didn't suit their interest. You know, the record label's a business, they're out to make money. They don't care about you. Sorry, I digress again. So this was my segue. Remember Kama Sutra Records? You're gonna wanna hear this, trust me. So one of the top brass of Kama Sutra Records was a man by the name of Artie Ripp. Artie Ripp was a man who wanted to be in the music industry, and he started off writing harmonies for the likes of Paul Anka. So Artie Ripp makes a revelation, and he notices that he's not gonna make any money writing harmonies. Instead, he should be on the other side of the contract. So Ripp was a kind of an ambiguous figure, you know, a record company A&R archetype. He would constantly make new labels and publishing companies with his associates, and he would trade artists and talent as if they were baseball cards. So Artie Ripp signs Billy Joel to his Family Productions label. And Family Productions was under the Paramount Company. Yeah, that same Paramount, Godfather, Titanic, the movie studio. So Ripp seemed like a really shady character from the beginning. And I don't know what Billy was thinking when he first signed with Artie Ripp, but I think he went to go sign with the devil that he knew rather than sign with the devil he did not know. I mean, if you were in that situation, would you sign with the devil? Actually, it turned out that Billy wanted to be a songwriter, nothing more, nothing less. And he was told by people in the industry that if he wanted to be a songwriter, then he should have an album produced and released. So this was one of the reasons why he signed with Ripp in the first place. But not only that, according to Ripp, Billy was sleeping in a laundromat floor, which is absolutely a desperate situation if you ask me, which is also another reason why he would have signed with anybody at the time. And I gotta be honest, I think if I were in Billy Joel's shoes at the time, I would have signed with Artie Ripp. So signing with Ripp allowed Billy to record his debut album, Cold Spring Harbor, in 1971. And as for the album, I could say this much. The songwriting was great. But when it came to the quality of the recording, oh man. Okay, go ahead and listen to this Alvin and the Chipmunks cover.
She's got a way of showing how I make her feel.
This was the final product of Cold Spring Harbor. I kid you not. What the hell were they smoking? Okay, to be fair, the album seemed like it was produced competently before it was pressed into vinyl. Okay, so back then, music was recorded on magnetic tape, and studios had these great big Ampexes or Studers, 16-track tape machines. And I think somebody just calibrated the machines wrong. By the way, they sound amazing if you know what you're doing as a producer. Or it may have been sabotage. Who knows? I would also like you to see this album cover. Look at it. Look at it! Pretty bad, right? But not as bad as a certain album cover that we'll mention in a later video. Trust me on this. So when the Cold Spring Harbor album came out, Billy Joel was pretty angry and embarrassed at the same time. He did begin his album tour in the fall of 1971, and I assumed the tour was horrible because Billy mentions that nobody got paid. Imagine that. You just signed everything away to this obscure record label, and after your first tour, you're still left with nothing. But this was around the time that there was a bootleg recording of Billy Joel playing his song Captain Jack on Philadelphia airwaves. A Columbia Records executive by the name of Herb Gordon took an immediate liking to the song and began the hunt for Billy Joel. And when Herb found him, he signed him to Columbia Records. And I'm not even sure if Billy disclosed that he was already signed with a label, Family Records. I wouldn't. So what I think happened was that Billy closed his eyes, signed the contract, out of sight, out of mind, right? I think he just wanted Artie Ripp and Family Records to just go away. And he thought Columbia Records could do just that. But we'll get to that in a bit. Hold your horses. So, after signing with Columbia Records, Billy moves to Los Angeles with his then girlfriend and her son, and he makes ends meet by playing piano in a piano bar called The Executive Room. And he was so scared of Artie Ripp and Family Records that he was playing under a pseudonym. I think he was going by Bill Martin, which was an even shorter version of his first name, and then Martin, which was his middle name. And just so you know, it was in LA that he wrote his most famous song, but we'll get to that in a later video. So it turns out when Columbia Records wanted to sign Billy Joel as a solo artist, they eventually had to settle with Artie Ripp, since Billy was under that crappy first contract. But that Artie Ripp man, he was a shrewd businessman. So obviously, business had to be conducted to transfer Billy's rights from Family Records to Columbia Records. And woo, let me tell you what Artie Ripp got away with. Artie Ripp got away with making the demand that he get 28 cents out of every dollar Billy Joel gets from an album sale. And Columbia agreed. Freaking A! Billy Joel had to pay Artie Ripp royalties all the way up to 1986. So the agreement was that Ripp would get his cut for 10 straight Billy Joel albums that Columbia Records released. But what added insult to injury and what irked Billy Joel the most was the fact that his albums had Ripp's logo living rent-free within the album artwork for those 10 albums. And I have no idea how Columbia Records agreed to Artie Ripp's demands. But I guess Columbia Records saw Artie Ripp as a nuisance, and they wanted Billy Joel just to make money for them. And Columbia Records, they were just looking out for themselves, because the deal they made allowed Ripp to go through Billy's pockets, not Columbia Records' pockets. But I think of it this way. At a time when Billy Joel was desperate, Artie Ripp was the only one that could see his potential. And he must have saw this unlimited ceiling that Billy had. And when Artie Ripp was making those negotiations with Columbia Records, he refused to simply be bought out. I mean, there's a million artists out there. What made Billy Joel different at that time? Artie Ripp must have saw something in him. And Billy was just a struggling musician at the time. He was still out to prove himself. But I think Ripp really saw that Billy would become something special, which is why he fought so freaking hard to get a piece of his royalties. He really did believe in him, and I don't know, can you blame me? I'm a hopeless romantic. Man, I can only imagine the relief Billy felt when he was free from Artie Ripp's claws. Hey, but that doesn't change the fact that Billy got screwed. But hey, in this life, you got to watch out for yourself. You got to know your value. You got to know your worth. That's the name of the game. Okay, we will go ahead and close this chapter on Billy Joel's early days. We covered Billy Joel's family history and his early career, and I hope you found that interesting. And we will continue with Billy Joel Month in the next series of videos, which will include 5 different videos of his top 5 best songs. And the songs that I picked are, in my opinion, which are completely and totally unbiased and impartial. And those videos will be really cool because I'll talk about how those songs were made and how they were recorded and all that good stuff. We will also take a look on what made those songs great by way of a bit of musical analysis. Again, please click that like button and please don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to get a notification with videos I upload, please click that bell icon. I have a bunch of awesome ideas for videos, and if it's your cup of tea, you'll like them too. Please leave a comment and tell me what you liked about this video. And again, if you encourage me, I'll make more videos at a faster pace. I'm Gary Castro, and thank you for watching.